Two agents came to the door. They asked for my father, and they took him away.
The FBI went to my father's work, said, "Mr. Jacobs, you're under arrest."
The police knocked on the door and said, "Come with us." So she had just time to pick up her purse and two lunks of kids, babies.
I was in Woodward High School, and the principal came into the room and he said, "Eberhard, I'm going to have to ask you to step off." And I was immediately arrested by an FBI agent.
I was about 6. I came home to find out that my father, being German, we were considered the enemy.
The Battle of the United States took place in every community in the nation. It was a struggle against enemy agents who had been sent to this country to disrupt our industries, destroy our morale, and damage the impact of our fighting armies.
It was wonderfully peaceful, except for this annoying siren sound in the back. And it didn't stop, and I became alarmed. I called for my mother, and there was no response. I saw the shadow of my mother. She'd been crying. She told me then my dad had been taken away.
Why is it so dark?
I knew then that our life had changed. And even at that age, you know, children are so intuitive, and they may not know the facts, but they understand.
My grandparents had written to my father and mother that they really wanted them to come back to take a look at what was happening to Germany, because when they left 10, 12 years prior, it was in tumult, where now Hitler had come to power in 1933. He had come to power just at the right time because everything was in disarray. And he was able to introduce a national feeling, national pride again, and brought this back to the German people.
They had been active in the local organization called the Bund. That was an organization of German-speaking people who were pro-Nazi, and they met out in Grafton, Wisconsin. My father took me along to a meeting that they had one evening, but then all of a sudden my father said in German, "Das Kind muss jetzt nach Hause gehen, es ist spät." That means the child has to go home now, it is late.
German-American Bund, you had to be a citizen. Couldn't become a member of that because he was still a German citizen.
Let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror, which paralyzes needed effort to convert retreat into advance.
He said I was a guard at a camp for Germans in North Dakota. And I said, "You mean prisoners of war?" He said, "No. Enemy aliens. These were German aliens who were caught in the United States." Well, I knew very well, having lived in California for 30 years, what the history of Japanese American internment was in California, but I'd never heard of what happened to Germans.
My mother kept waiting for him at our, we lived on the 3rd floor. She kept waiting for him because she thought, well, maybe my father's dropped off and went to the bar and had a beer or two and was going to come home later, but he never did come home.
Apparently he was put on a train or something. I don't know exactly what happened because he never really spoke about it.
And we went then to my brother's place of employment, a Burger Brewery in Cincinnati. They arrested him. They immediately took us down to police headquarters where there was a jail cell in the back, and they charged us with suspicion.
My mother, of course, was in a panic. She took me along down to the police station. They transferred him to, I believe it was Cincinnati. She had to drive there to meet him.
They had taken him to the Seattle jail, I learned afterwards. He was shipped to Department of Justice, DOJ camp in Missoula, Montana.
The Army clearly did not want the public knowing about these internment camps, and many of these people never knew why they were interned, because the process was they were brought before a hearing board and they were told, prove your innocence. They were considered guilty until they could prove that they were innocent. And of course, when you don't know what you're being accused of, and they were never told the charges against them, all violations of the Constitution, it's very difficult to defend yourself.
The Enemy Alien Act of 1798 was the initial legal setting, largely because there were anxieties about the French at that time. And the Enemy Alien Act was designed to make sure that we took security measures to prevent any sabotage or espionage from French.
And what it does is it gives the government the power to essentially do whatever it wants to non-citizens who are residing in the United States.
And when World War II broke out in December 7th, 1941, that act was still on the books. It had been there since 1798. President Roosevelt used that as his authority for arresting German, Italian, and Japanese aliens.
A short-wave radio set beamed for Germany was discovered in the Bronx. An American ship was torpedoed in the Caribbean. Letters addressed to mail drops in Spain and South America were intercepted. In a house outside Los Angeles, this self-appointed dictator set himself up in the business of promoting Nazism.
You have to stop and realize that, yes, there is a group of people of a particular ethnic group or political affiliation that's anti-US, that is a threat to my well-being or my status or whatever, but that doesn't mean that everything or everybody who belongs to that group is my enemy. They attack Pearl Harbor, they attack the Twin Towers, they attack the Pentagon. Then you get that anger, you know, that hysteria, and you get caught in the hysteria, and you become anti-German, anti-Japanese, anti-Muslim. And you forget that not all Germans were Nazis, not all Japanese were members of the imperial government, and not all Muslims are Al-Qaeda.
They participated in the German-American Day parades, and we did too, as Boy Scouts. It was a social club more than anything.
August 1940, the British blacklist came into existence. And my father and his business was on the blacklist. From the British standpoint, you couldn't do any business, but Britain didn't have the strength to really carry through. Franklin Delano Roosevelt issued a proclaimed list, basically it's another blacklist from the United States standpoint. And the United States did have the power. If you do business with Werner Gorka, you are going to be also put on the blacklist. Once the American blacklist, proclaimed list came out, my parents knew that my father's business was doomed.
Some of the neighbors had turned him in, and there's one neighbor that testified against him, and then he did get talked into going to some meetings.
We were told you were not allowed to have an attorney, you were not allowed to have a witness. I didn't know how it was going with him, but I was reading the paper, that very paper I was supposed to deliver that morning, that 2 brothers were arrested. They will have a hearing. They will be interned. So when it came my turn, it was pretty well cut and dried. But there were something like 5 people at the conference table. They constituted the hearing board, and the FBI agent that arrested me at Woodward asked the questions, and the questions were obviously things that people either had called in, that they said, well, you know that the Ford family goes to German American Day at Coney Island. The boys sang in a kinderchor, and incidentally, I sang in a kinderchor with Doris Day because her father was conductor of the kinderchor. We sang in German, so yeah, that was a German activity, all right. And of course, my parents did subscribe to a German language newspaper. But the implication was that we were really not just German sympathizers, but that we were actually Nazis.
After my father had been arrested, I kept saying to myself, this is not right. This is not the way we do it in America. So I wrote, and my brother wrote with me, he signed the letter. I wrote to Edward J. Ennis. He was the director of the Alien Enemy Control Unit. And said, Mr. Ennis, you ought to release my father because he's a good American, he's a patriot, and we needed him at home. And Mr. Ennis wrote back and said, tough. We didn't use those words, but that's in essence what he said, tough, he's going to stay interned.
Well, there's a difference between being loyal or proud of your home country, your homeland, versus following the politics of Nazi Germany. Before World War II, the U.S. was suffering from vast discrimination, not only against Germans or Japanese, but against all ethnic groups.
For years before the war, the world had been overrun with German tourists, German and Japanese diplomats and their paid agents, disguised as cameramen, domestics, and industrialists. Enemy agents were using both coasts of South America as extended listening posts to inform the axis of our shipping in the Atlantic and the Pacific. A network of German airlines, beginning in Argentina, had spread as far north as Colombia, and Colombia air bases could dominate the Panama Canal. A neighboring and friendly continent could become an armed menace aimed directly at the United States.